Unit 3 starts with Chapter 6, Lesson 1. We're going to talk about ratios. We know that 5/8 means 5 out of 8, which is the fraction. It also means 5 divided by 8. Now we're going to consider a third interpretation, the ratio of 5 to 8. And a ratio is just a comparison of two quantities, which is a little different sometimes than a fraction. This would be 8 parts in the whole, and now we're just comparing two things. So you can write it in 3 different ways. You can write it 5 to 8, or you can write it with a colon, or you can write it as a fraction. This will be a real useful thing as we move through this section. A math class consists of junior and senior students. There are 15 juniors and 17 seniors, and we're going to write a ratio of juniors to seniors. So we have 15 to 17, or we could write it 15 to 17, or we could write it with a colon, 15 to 17. So it's sometimes it might be out of the whole. I mean, you might have a ratio of juniors to students in the class, which in that case would be 15 to, in the class altogether, there are 32. So 15 to 32, 15 to 32, or we could write it 15 to 32. You have to just be careful that you are writing the ratio of what they're asking for you to compare. So when we write it as a fraction, it's easy to see that we can write it in lowest terms or simplest form. So if we're talking 15 feet to 10 feet, it's easy to simplify this fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 5, and we would have a ratio of 3 to 2, which is simpler, or the terms are lower than they were originally. This one, $20 to $10, we can divide the numerator and denominator both by 10, and we would have 2 to 1, or we could write it 2 to 1, or we could write it with a colon. You only need to write it one way. Any of those are right. We can divide out the like units. For instance, here we had feet and feet, and we can get rid of those. Here we had dollars to dollars, and we can divide the numerator and denominator by that label, just as we would common factors. Even though 3 to 2 is equivalent to 1.5, we do not write the ratio as a mixed number. We simply have a whole number on the top, a whole number on the bottom. We don't change that to a mixed number when we're talking about ratios. We can if we're talking about fractions, but not when we're talking about ratios. If we want to write a ratio of decimals and mixed numbers, comparing those two quantities together, both the numerator and denominator need to be whole numbers. So if we had 7 5/10 as compared to 6 25/100, if we want to make those whole numbers, we know that we could multiply this numerator, or the top number, by 10, and that would move the decimal point over, so we would have 75. But if we do that to the numerator, we have to do that to the bottom number, and the bottom number would still have a decimal place in it. So what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to multiply them both by 100, which means we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So we would have 750 on the top and 625 on the bottom. And we could simplify those by dividing both of these by 25. Well, actually, more than that. We could divide them by, 125, I guess. We could do it in a couple of steps with 25, but we would have 6 to 5. We would have this ratio as simplest form. If we have 2 1/4 to 3 1/2, we can write the mixed numbers as improper fractions. 2 times 4 would be 8, plus 1 would be 9/4 on the top. 3 sets of 2 would be 6, and 1 would be 7/2 on the bottom. And now we can divide 9/4 divided by 7/2. Instead of multiplying, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to flip number 2. And we can do some canceling. We can divide this numerator and this denominator by 2. Or we can go ahead and multiply and do that later. And we would have 9 to 14 as our simplified ratio. So if we have decimals, then we want to make them whole numbers. We have to remember that we have to do both the numerator and denominator by the same number. So I'd look for the one that has the most decimal places and figure out what I have to multiply it by. The number of places I move that decimal point, I have to do the same in the other number. If we have improper fractions, we're going to change those to improper fractions. If we had mixed numbers, change them to improper fractions, and then we can divide and end up with a whole number on the top and a whole number on the bottom.